In the twilight shadows of ancient civilizations, where flickering oil lamps cast long, trembling silhouettes on mud brick walls and marble columns, stories were far more than entertainment. They were warnings. They were guides for the soul. They were the trembling voice in the night, whispering truths too dark to say aloud. Long before the gentle tales of fairy godmothers and happily ever afters, the first stories were not meant to lull children to sleep. They were meant to keep them awake, wide-eyed with caution, trembling at the monsters that lurked not only in the wild, but in the corners of the human heart. Let us journey back, far beyond the Disney-fied endings and pastel illustrations. Let us return to the cradles of civilization: Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, India, and China. Here, myths were forged in the fires of fear and hope, and the stories we now call fairy tales were once blood-chilling parables about survival, fate, and the darkness that dwells within us all. Imagine the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Today, it's a simple warning to beware of strangers, packaged neatly in a tale of a clever girl and a hungry wolf. But its origins are older, darker. In the forests of medieval Europe, parents whispered versions of this story to children so they would not stray from the path and meet the wolves. Very real, very hungry wolves, waiting in the shadows. In some versions, the wolf is not an animal, but a man, a predator in disguise, reminding us that dangers often wear familiar faces. The horror here is not supernatural, but profoundly human. It is the horror of trust betrayed, of innocence devoured. And what of Cinderella? We remember the sparkling gown and the glass slipper. Yet in the ancient stories, the stepsisters slice off their own toes and heels, their blood soaking the shoes in desperate bids for power and privilege. The message is clear. Ambition, unchecked by morality, leads only to pain. In the Greek version, Rhodopis, a slave girl, wins the heart of the pharaoh not through magic, but through virtue and suffering. A reminder that in the ancient world, suffering was the crucible in which true character was forged. Turn your gaze to the east, to ancient China, where the legend of Ye Xian, the earliest known Cinderella tale, was not a fantasy, but a lesson in patience and endurance. The magical fish who grants wishes is killed by a jealous stepmother, its bones hidden away. There is no fairy godmother, only grief and perseverance. When Ye Xian finally attends the festival, it is not to win a prince, but to reclaim her agency. The horror is subtle but profound, that what you love can be taken from you, and only through suffering can you reclaim your destiny. Consider Hansel and Gretel, wandering through the black woods, breadcrumbs trailing behind them like hope itself. The kindly woodsman of modern tales is a myth. In the original stories, famine stalks the land, and parents abandon their children to die, forced by starvation and desperation. The witch's house, sweet on the outside, hides an oven waiting to consume the innocent. The lesson? Appearances deceive, and survival sometimes demands unthinkable sacrifices. The horror is both external and internal. The world is cruel, and sometimes so are we.
Journey further to the banks of the Nile, where the myth of Isis and Osiris unfolds like a shadow play in the moonlight. Osiris, the just king, is betrayed by his own brother Set, who murders and dismembers him. Isis, his devoted wife, searches for the pieces of his body scattered across Egypt, piecing him together in a desperate act of love and mourning. This is no bedtime story. It is a meditation on the horror of loss, the agony of betrayal, and the undying hope of resurrection. The ancient Egyptians saw in this tale the cycles of the seasons, the death and rebirth of the land. But for the individual, it was a reminder that love must sometimes walk through darkness, and that even the gods are not immune to tragedy.
Turn now to the labyrinthine streets of ancient Greece, where the legend of Medusa slithers through the centuries. Once a beautiful maiden, Medusa is transformed into a monster, not by her own deeds, but by the cruelty of the gods. Her hair becomes snakes, her gaze turns men to stone. She is hunted by Perseus, who slays her and uses her head as a weapon. The horror here is not merely in her monstrous form, but in the injustice of her fate, the terror of being made a monster for the sins of others. The Greeks understood that horror often lies in the loss of agency, the stripping away of humanity. In Rome, the story of Proserpina, stolen away to the underworld by Pluto, was a tale of longing and dread. The earth withers as her mother, Ceres, searches for her. Winter descends, crops die, and hunger gnaws at the people. Only with Proserpina's return does life bloom again. Here, the horror is cyclical, inevitable. A reminder that suffering is part of the natural order, that every spring must be paid for with winter. Now, let us cross the Indus to ancient India, where the Ramayana weaves its tapestry of devotion and despair. Sita, abducted by the demon king Ravana, endures captivity and temptation. Her rescue is not the end of her trials. She must prove her purity, walking through fire to silence doubters. The horror is psychological. The world is quick to judge, slow to forgive. The Ramayana does not shy from depicting suffering as part of the human condition, nor does it promise that virtue will always be rewarded with happiness. In ancient China, the legend of the white snake is a haunting tale of love defying the boundaries between the mortal and the supernatural. A snake spirit, longing to be human, transforms herself into a beautiful woman and marries a mortal man. When her true nature is revealed, the world turns against her. She is hunted, imprisoned, and her love is condemned. The horror here is the tragedy of difference, the pain of loving in a world that fears what it cannot understand. But why, you may wonder, did ancient storytellers craft such chilling tales? Why wrap wisdom in the cloak of horror? Because fear is a teacher. It sharpens the senses, focuses the mind. In a world where danger was ever present, where wolves roamed the forests, famine haunted the fields, and the whims of gods or kings could change a life in an instant, stories were shields. They taught caution, humility, and the necessity of moral courage. They reminded listeners that evil is real, and it often wears a familiar face. Yet these stories also contain seeds of hope. For every horror, there is a lesson. For every monster, a hero. For every night, a dawn. The ancients understood that confronting darkness was not the same as surrendering to it. In facing the wolf, the witch, the cruel gods, or the unkind world, their heroes, and by extension their listeners, learned resilience. They learned to value kindness, loyalty, and wisdom. They learned that suffering could be endured, that wrongs could be avenged or forgiven, that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit could prevail. These old tales, with all their blood and shadows, still whisper to us today. They remind us that life is not always a fairy tale, that monsters, both real and metaphorical, still prowl our world. But they also remind us that we are not powerless, that courage, love, and cleverness can light even the darkest path. As we look at our modern world, we see new wolves stalking new forests. Scams and fraudsters wear the faces of friends, and predatory figures lurk behind screens. Ambition, unchecked by ethics, still leaves trails of pain. The suffering of the innocent, the betrayal of trust, the longing for justice and redemption. These are as real now as they were in the days of ancient kings and queens. So what can we learn from these myths-turned-horror stories? First, to look beneath the surface. Evil rarely announces itself with a roar. It comes in whispers, in smiles, in the small choices we make every day. The wolf is not always a beast. Sometimes it is a man in disguise. The witch's house may look inviting, but danger hides within. Before we trust, we must see clearly. Before we act, we must consider the cost. Second, we learn the price of pride and unchecked ambition. The stepsisters who mutilate themselves, the kings who betray brothers, the gods who punish mortals for their own failings. These stories warn us that the pursuit of power without conscience leads only to ruin. In our own lives, we must guard against the temptation to cut corners, to harm others for our own gain. True success is built not on blood, but on integrity. Third, we learn the value of resilience. The heroes and heroines of these tales endure suffering that would break lesser souls. They persist, even when hope seems lost. In our own struggles, whether with illness, loss, or loneliness, we can draw strength from their example. We are not alone in our suffering. Others have walked this path before us, and they have emerged, if not unscathed, then wiser and stronger. Fourth, these stories teach us to cherish what is good: kindness, loyalty, love. In a world full of darkness, these are the lights that guide us home. The fisherman who helps a stranger, the daughter who risks all to save her father, the friend who stands by your side in the storm, these are the true heroes. In our own lives, let us strive to be such lights for others. Finally, we are reminded that every generation must confront its own monsters. The tales of old were shaped by the fears and hopes of their time. Our fears may have changed shape, but they have not vanished. By telling these stories, by listening to them and learning from them, we arm ourselves for the battles ahead. We remind ourselves that horror can be survived, that evil can be faced, that hope endures. So, dear listeners, as you reflect on the myths that became the dark roots of our fairy tales, ask yourself, what monsters do you face today? What lessons can you draw from the courage and cunning of heroes past? How can you protect yourself and those you love from the wolves and witches of the modern world? I invite you now, share your thoughts, your stories. Have you ever encountered a situation where a fairy tale warning came true in your life? How did you overcome it? What advice would you give to others walking through their own dark forests? Let us learn from one another, as the ancients did around the fire, weaving our own wisdom into the tapestry of time. If you found these stories stirring, if they awakened old memories or new thoughts, let me know in the comments. Share your own tales, your own lessons learned in the shadows. Like and subscribe to join our community of seekers and storytellers as we continue to explore the mysteries and marvels of the ancient world. For in every myth, in every story, there is a truth waiting to be uncovered. A truth that just might help us all live wiser, braver, and kinder lives today.